Cool, cool, cool. All right, so thank you guys for coming out here. I'm going to invite Kelsey Hightower, who doesn't need a lot of an intro, to the stage-ish thing that we got going on here with me. So Kelsey, if you want to kind of come up. Cool. Mike. Awesome. So
I'm a fish out of water. Like, who is this guy? He's not downloaded any Nix packages. That may or may not be true. We'll find out.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be really cool. Kelsey and I were talking, and obviously, I'm assuming most folks here know your history, but maybe you want to share like a quick kind of glimpse into that, so there's full context. But I thought it'd be really amazing to hear from someone who's been in the industry for a really long time, been working on Kubernetes for, from inception over there, kind of what you think about Nix and maybe having kind of a frank conversation about it.
Yeah, I read the Nix paper last year, and I was like, look at this, in my view, this buried treasure. And it feels like there was a fork in the road a couple of decades ago where this problem was definitely apparent. Back then, I was a big user of systems like Red Hat. I started my career on FreeBSD, and there was this situation of like, how do you get more than one thing on a system without them overriding each other or fighting each other? Then I spent the rest of my career putting one app per VM because no one solved the problem 10 years later. That just became the thing you did. Then we got tools like RVM in the Ruby community because your gem files would literally fight with each other, and you taught them to behave. I also worked on tools like virtual inf in the Python community. And then Docker came out. And I think Docker leaned into the reality was that no one had solved this problem because every programming language also came with its own package manager and ways of doing things. And then Golang came out, and it was like, forget libc altogether. Build static binaries, and we just skipped that entire step. And in many ways, it felt like Docker had won, not just because it figured out reproducible software, because it didn't. It figured out how to match the reality of the way people write software. It's messy. It's non-deterministic. People do all kind of weird things because the focus went from operating systems to applications. And Docker became the perfect format for people to get that done and distribute it to each other. And so I read Nick's paper after going through this whole journey. It's like, where were you 2 decades ago when I was at that fork in the road? Maybe we would have went in a different way. And so a lot of my initial feedback has been, this ain't usable. When you show, it's like showing people Vim for the first time when all they know is Microsoft Word. How do I get out of this thing? It's like, why'd you turn off your computer? It's like, that was the only way. And I did that before, right? To get out of Vim, I had shame. I just turned the whole thing off. Turned my computer back on. I was like, I'm out of there. Never doing that again. And I think for a lot of people, Nix can feel that way because it feels very foreign if you don't understand the benefits of what it does when you first look at it. So that's like my journey into this, and I'm going to try to be as honest and pragmatic, and maybe I can share a little bit of advice about what it feels like to be successful in this type of project. I think a lot of people get caught up in the numbers, GitHub stars, what project wins, what way wins, and that's probably the wrong way to look at this. Because when it comes to infrastructure, when you truly get successful, you tend to become irrelevant. No one talks about TCP/IP like they used to. No one talks about Linux like they used to. I'm not saying these things aren't important. It's just that when the highways become stable, people focus on the cars that drive on them and not the underlying asphalt. So we just got to make sure the success criteria is super clear.
Yeah. So just a quick anecdote. I have like 15 questions for Kelsey that we're going to riff on, but because this is a small room of like 10 people, ask questions. So in about 2 questions, I'm going to look at you all, and I hope you have a really good damn question for me. But if you don't, I'm going to ask more boring questions.
Any question is fair game.
Fair game.
Like, we all got into the same place, and this is something that you could only do in person. So please, the ad hoc questions, anything's fair game. It will be dope.
Yeah, and then Zach is going to be the one that shouts at me to get out of the room, so you don't have to worry about that. So you kind of mentioned a bunch of things there, right? And you mentioned Docker, and obviously your time at Puppet and Kubernetes. Why, I think it's like, why now is a big question for all of us here. What do you think about that?
I have more time. I retired a year and a half ago. And so I don't need to pick the technology that is easy to monetize. I no longer work at a large cloud provider where customers want to go in a particular direction. So now I just get to do the thing that you get to do in your spare time. I have a lot more of it. And so that piqued my curiosity. What did I miss? Right? So I spend a lot of time writing C these days and be like, why would you do that? Because I missed that stage. And there's a lot to learn from the things that I missed. And so going to look at Nix, I think I posted something on Twitter like, I finally read the Nix paper. Half of y'all were like, duh, you're late. The other half is like, welcome. And one of those groups of people that said welcome was the team over at Phlox. They showed me what they were building. Some of the gripes I had around UX, they showed me what they were doing around the UX stuff. And I decided to take another look. And so the hands-on approach is like, how could you make Docker better if you had something like Nix in the middle? So if you've never used Docker before, there's this Docker file. And if you look at people's Docker files, it's like a big-ass bash script the way most people do things, right? Yum install everything. Download all the NPM modules just in case I need one. And then my app. And then you ship this 4 terabyte thing to servers. You're like, it's repeatable software. And then you spend half your time scanning, looking for vulnerabilities. We're right back to where we were 20 years ago. If you look at some of the biggest problems in that community, they're literally fighting the same battles we were doing with bare metal and VMs. They just packaged it in another artifact this time. And so people have worked on slimming technologies where you try to start the app, look at its system calls, run an strace, and figure out exactly what it needs. You run it in production, and you find out you miss one. So we've been doing a lot of reverse engineering, and I was like, what if we were able to do this differently? So after the whole SolarWinds debacle, there has been a rise in interest in secure software supply chains. And I think now people are open to a different approach. I think people are a little tired of the brute force. And so the promise of Nix is that we can be a little bit more exact. So instead of generating an SBOM after you built the application through reverse engineering, what if you could be way more explicit up front? So that's been appealing to me. So I've been looking at like, how do we take the current situation we're in, especially the one that's baked in containers, and then can Nix add value to that scenario? Notice I'm not saying Nix will replace all of the Docker things. I don't think that needs to be an absolute success criteria for people. If you can make the current problems better, that's how I think you bring in more people, and it definitely was attractive to someone like me.
So obviously I'm biased, right? But I know Hacker News love this shtick. I think you can get some Hacker News karma every 6 months by asking this question. Like you mentioned Docker, obviously, Nix or Docker. You had to choose one.
Woo! Look at the Nix people, like, there's like a church of Nix out there.
I have to say, Kelsey was like, I'm super excited about talking. I'm like, wow, you've talking at a big stage. It's like, no, I feel this is going to be different. I'm like, hell yeah, that's going to be different.
Look, if I had to choose one, I'm choosing Docker. And you would say, why would I do that? Think through it. Most people that are writing code, your whole number one objective isn't the packaging tool nor format. Your goal is to ship something. So if you're a developer, you look at all the things that you can ship to. Heroku, Cloud Run, Lambda, a VM, and then you got to work on a team of other people. And the hardest thing I've seen in technology is to get global consensus. We agree on something. IP addresses, DNS, Linux as a distribution. That stuff takes decades sometimes. And so the Docker ecosystem is rich. Why is it rich? Is it a better packaging tool than Nix? No. Do people know it? Yes. That cute little well did something. People identify with it. So when you say Docker, a lot of people understand what that means. You're probably going to have a Docker file that moved the needle in terms of at least knowing how to rebuild software. There's still a lot of companies, maybe you work for some of them, they pride themselves that only one person knows how to build certain software on a specific laptop, and no one touches that laptop because the only thing that can build the thing. And for a lot of people, Docker moved the needle for them. And the ecosystem's rich. There's Docker registries, there's metadata, there's all of these things. So if I had to choose only one, it would probably be Docker. So what would you take away from that? What makes Docker work? It's not one versus the other. It's just this usability curve. It meets people where they are, then shows them what's next. And I've been a part of a lot of technology movements that just focused on, here's the next thing. It's like, so what do I do now to go from where I am to that? And you're like, I don't know, man. Delete everything you have and start the right way. just doesn't work, right? But I'm hoping that the two can find some synergies where it's pragmatic. And I do think Nix inside of a Docker file for a lot of people will solve the reproducible build problem without giving up the distribution and ease of use for other platform problem. And I think that's probably where you're gonna get a lot of new people learning about this technology for the first time. So when you see them, welcome them.
Sweet, love that. By the way, I'm about 1.5 questions away from looking at you guys sternly for about 30 seconds in an awkward situation. So Kubernetes, right, kind of built on top, had that whole Docker story. What's some blunt, hard lessons learned that we should be trying to take away from that, learning about as we're on this journey into Nix path?
When Kubernetes came out, they were super humble. Like, I don't know, it's probably hard to believe that now given their position in things. But Docker, in the early days of Docker, it was like, that's all people said. Docker, 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 Docker. I saw a person with a Docker tattoo. Anyone got a Nix tattoo in here? Someone's like, I don't know if I should show it.
Where's Zilko? I know he has two, but I don't know if he wants to show them.
But there are people with Docker tattoos. And I saw this, I was like, dude, this is like religion. And a lot of people built their culture around it. And honestly, I remember I was still at CoreOS, and I had just joined Google. And I'm in this, we're sitting at DockerCon with a bunch of distinguished engineers, people who wrote the Borg paper. They wrote about all of these things, and they were just sitting there depressed. It's like Docker's going to run away with this whole thing. We don't stand a chance. They made this thing easy. Kubernetes was like we were very humble in the beginning. We had a 30-node limit. And this is when Mesos was out. Anybody remember Mesos?
Yep.
Some of you still have it running. You're trying to hold on. It's over. It's over. And we had 30-node limits, and they were doing 10,000 nodes, and it was like a little bit of shame. People were like, you guys only do 30 nodes? Why even try? What are you doing? And we decided to focus on the API, understand the gaps between Docker and what we could bring to the table. And so we were sitting on top of something that was far more successful, and we didn't think it was going to actually work long term. But we're going to try it anyway. And then we had a 100-node limit. People still laughed at us. 100 nodes, not that important. And over time, we did get to the big node limits, but the thing we did better is every gap there was in like Docker on a single server, we focused on, and those became features of this thing we call Kubernetes. It became a collection of things. We started adding things over time, and we were very explicit with the community, like, this is what we're trying to do, and we welcomed a lot of people, and we introduced the extension system. And when we introduced what they call CRDs, or extensions, that was the game changer that allowed people from the Mesos community to build their own schedulers. It allowed people from the Docker community to build their own volume types or whatever custom workload that they wanted to do. And we welcomed all, and that meant Kubernetes got pushed down. And we were okay with that. Kubernetes did not have to be the top line item, even though a lot of people talk about it. No one talks about Kubernetes independent of its ecosystem. So my advice to you all, what is the Nix ecosystem? Everyone's gonna have different ideas on how to make this core technology work. And I think you gotta figure out a way to make sure that they feel like they're first-class citizens as well. If you reject that, then you're gonna have to try to do it alone on this core technology, and it's gonna be pass or fail. There's no reason to not hedge your bets by allowing more people in the community. That would be my number one takeaway. Figure out how to let people solve their own problems, and that will take a little pressure from the core.
Thank you. So I have a few more questions, but I'm going to open it up to y'all.
Any questions from the audience? Anything is fair game. Oh, over there, he was waiting.
Tim.
Thanks for this great panel. The question is about the elephant in the other room, AI. AI is changing what we build and how we build it. I'm just wondering what you think about how AI relates to Nix, whether it represents an opportunity or a challenge to get where the puck is going to be, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll repeat that. So Tim Sears, thank you for the question. He's asking about how AI and the change that AI is bringing is going to be relevant to the Nix ecosystem or what we're doing here.
I mean, look, there's multiple ways to look at it. I've been a disruptor a few times where, I remember joining Puppet Labs and configuration management days. The Corn Shell people was like, we will never stop writing shell scripts. We can care less about your DSL. This whole movement is a waste of time. When I started working on container technologies, people were like, this is a waste of time. VMs are far superior. even the COBOL people was like, we will return one day. And my current stance, because I don't really have a lot of the problems that I think it's great at, I've also chosen to somewhat ignore it, meaning I'm 44 years old. I've had a nice career, almost 25 years in this game. And I look at this stuff and it's like people overpromise every hype wave, every hype cycle. People just overpromise and tend to underdeliver. But there is some value. So I did a little experiment and said, okay, if you look at some of the fundamentals, like this LLM thing, you guys remember what was that Dragon software back in the day? It never worked. It's like, oh, I'm just going to talk out my paper. And it's like, no, you still can type faster than some of that software. The language stuff is at its peak at this point. Like most of this stuff understands natural language pretty well. And so what can you do with it? That's the part where I think most people are super excited. I now have a more natural query language. Select star from column where equals is hard. Using natural language is easier, and some people have shown pretty good use cases where they're giving people this alternative interface that may or may not be useful. The second thing that I did was working from bottom up. I don't think AI changes how we interact with systems. AI also interacts with the exact same systems, right? Like you still have to parse the input and have it call some command. Against what? The same machines that we had before. So one experiment that I did just to understand the whole agent movement, I think this is the other part of the equation. So you have this large language model. For some people, it's a better search. I don't need to go to Stack Overflow. I'll take this broken answer instead. Most developers, believe it or not, copy and paste quite a bit, right? I had this phrase, I remember, good developers copy, great developers paste. And if that's what you're doing, ChatGPT in your editor sounds like the perfect copy and paste mechanism. So that's one way of thinking about this. Search, give me some examples, and a lot of docs suck. And so getting this thing to even hallucinate about any docs is better than no docs in some people's case. But the agent movement is interesting because I think we introduced all these new words to describe what we already have. So I work with a lot of VCs, and part of the due diligence work, companies will say, we have this AI platform with agents that will replace people. I was like, wow, what kind of people can you replace? You won't need a sales rep with our software. I was like, oh my God, I gotta see this. Could you show me? I was like, have you ever sold anything to anyone before? They were like, no. I was like, now I understand why you think you can replace a sales rep. You don't know what that is. And so a lot of people in this space, they're trying to solve problems that they don't actually understand. So they think they can personify the surface of the problem. They think sales reps take data from Salesforce, sort it in a spreadsheet, and call people. So they demonstrate that. So you say, let me see your agent, right? And I'm like, what is an agent? And they're like, oh, Kelsey, an agent is like, you ever seen Star Wars? I'm like, stop. Stop right there. It's not magic. And so when you look at the source code, a lot of the agents are literally doing things the LLM can't. You know, the whole tool calling. So when I step back from all of this, I say, you know the net improvement that I see? In the Unix days, you wrote the scripts yourself. You figured out what utilities do what. You chain them together to make bigger commands. You use domain knowledge to do that. I've seen LLMs do the whole tool calling loop, and that is a net new primitive that I think a developer might want to use. No different than SSL or an encryption library that you get from the disk. So I think there's something there, but I don't think it's ever going to be what the hype and the promise is. So I'm just going to treat it as another SDK that allows me to do a certain set of functionality. And until I see a new type of computer, a new type of architecture, my idea is that most AI is just going to interface to the things we already have, and maybe we get better workflows out of it. That's the way I think about AI at the moment. There's another question back there.
Yeah, Kelsey, I actually saw you at the first KubeCon, and I knew you were going to win, so just so you know.
Thank you.
So wait, you're here, and what you're saying is that you're our lucky charm.
Exactly. No, I actually went to that DockerCon too as well, and I knew they were going to lose, but that's another side. To follow the AI question, what about though AI is that next layer down as sort of a solvent to move from old legacy crap code A to new shiny Nix code B, for example?
The thing about migrations, think about this. I worked in finance, and I actually learned COBOL in 2007, 2008. I joined the team. They're like, hey, everything's legacy. It makes us a bunch of money. It's the reason why we have all jobs, and we hate it, and we want to remove it. And I was like, wow, that sounds a little backwards, right? Like, when things do a good job for a long time, we tend to give them medals, and we put them in the Hall of Fame. But when it comes to software, you just want to come in and rewrite it in Rust. It's like, for what? What's the value? So every new technology paradigm shows up and says we need to go from the old thing to the new thing, just so people can do exactly the thing that they were doing before, but in Rust. And that doesn't necessarily work well. I saw this in cloud, where people are like, hey, we want to get out of legacy cloud, and we want to go from our VMs to your VMs. I was like, you know, the app is pretty much going to do the same thing it was doing before, but in the cloud. So when you say, let's use AI to move people to Nix, remember the big picture. I need to put an app in front of customers so they can use it to do something. And when you zoom out, how many parts are to that puzzle? How big of a piece will Nix represent in that puzzle? So even if you could figure it out and how to do it, a lot of people may be reluctant because they don't see the actual value. The value isn't just reproducible software. A lot of people throw that one around. You can get every security certification in the world without reproducible software. That's a fact. And until that changes, then that's not going to be your number one selling point. So I think the way you're going to have to explain this is, why would I do this? Why would I do this?
So I know there's a bunch of questions. I'm looking at Zach to kind of tell the time because I know we started late. 2 more?
We'll take this last
All right.
question here.
Oh, 10 more minutes. Oh, wow.
10. So we'll
Whoa.
go here, and then we'll go
All
there.
right, there we go, Fareed.
So,
Oh, sorry. Shay.
Kubernetes is obviously one in the sort of cloud, large server, many server service orchestration space. But at least in my assessment on the kind of embedded multiple system, robotic systems world, or small individual machines, it's overkill and not kind of like fit for purpose there. What do you think is the right path forward, and do you think Nix has a role there, and Docker, and how does that work here too? Like solving that problem the way Kubernetes solved it.
So Kubernetes didn't win infrastructure, by the way.
Okay.
When I was in cloud, the largest customers had some Kubernetes for sure. But if you looked at their bill, right, if you want the truth from anyone, look at their bill. 70% VMs. That's the truth. So Kubernetes did solve a problem. It wasn't scale either. Like before I left cloud, the average compute cluster size was like 3 to 5 nodes. So the question is, why would you use Kubernetes when you only have 5 nodes? It was the management interface. This component where I can describe what I want, give it to the system, and for most workload deployments, it literally just worked for most people. So again, building on the backs of Docker, having this container image and a YAML file, you can run software without thinking about the low-level details. For a lot of people, that was a win. So to your question, should you put Kubernetes on a robot? Like, no. Why?
Is this recorded? I need to show my code.
Yep, it's recorded.
I'm sending it to several people.
But the thing is, I think people forget that Kubernetes literally runs on top of VMs. It takes a YAML file and turns it to a bunch of commands so that Docker can start your binary under the kernel. Same thing. So if I had a single machine like a robot, why would I need that? Now, this is very different than, can I configure a robot using a Kubernetes-style manifest? You could. Do you need to bring in etcd, a scheduler, the controller manager, Pulumi, Prometheus? Argo. You did it. You put Argo on your robot. Like, you don't have to do all of that. I think some people do get carried away. Like, if you've ever seen the CNCF landscape, you go, there's like 1 million squares for every category. And I think a lot of developers and operations people treat this like some LinkedIn badge competition. How many of these things can I install on one server before it dies?
By the way, this wasn't planted, right? Because like your mention of robots was very on point with Shay there. So
Yeah, so, but I do think bottoms-up thinking can help. So Kubernetes was born from bottoms-up thinking. Docker has the machine covered, Let's interface the missing pieces, the scheduler, a central place to put config, and control loops to manage the state. If you don't need that, now I think that makes people attractive is when you ask people like, what is Kubernetes? Kubernetes is etcd, a key value store, and an API server that gives types to infrastructure, and a bunch of control loops that do things. A lot of people like that architecture. So for a robot, I can imagine you asking yourself, what's the interfaces to a robot that can be declarative? And my guess is a lot of the things that a robot do will be imperative. Like, I declare you shall wash the dishes. Well, how many dishes? You have to be specific. So you just can't do everything with Kube. And if you were to do it, I think you should collapse the layers. And maybe something like K3S might be a better fit, something built for that world. But don't get too dogmatic about it. We'll take this last question here. Wow, you guys got questions. I like it.
Fareed.
We'll go back there.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of sage advice. It's coming from more like an enterprise business mindset. Challenge I'm keen to hear your thoughts on is like many of us here are using Nix personally, so it's a little bit more ideological, right? Like we do want, there's a certain joy you get from knowing things built from a very tiny source, that it doesn't matter, like you're saying, you get security certificates, even if it's not so. So it's like, where do you see that marrying, you know, like Kubernetes, all those people run it in their home lab, maybe. People aren't running it. It's more of an industry software, where Nix is like, you know, many of us are here to use Home Manager, or we're daily driving Nix OS. So it's like balancing that, you know, ideological side, right? The scale, Linux, like we do see this Puritan view, and that's what we bring a lot of joy. And yeah, it's like a comment slash question.
No, I think this is the most important part. The thing that drew me to open source the most is because when I started my career right out of high school in 1999, I could not afford AIX, the Solaris boxes, and I was so happy that I could go, there was a store called CompUSA, and you could buy the Linux magazine, and there was a CD in the back. And it's like, wow, someone's giving away software for free. And I remember it was just like random distro of the month, and you can install it, and it was very accessible. And a lot of people were just building that stuff in their spare time. They just wanted it to exist. I've maintained my own open source projects, and the ones that I felt the best at maintaining were the ones where I didn't care if you used it or not. I had a very clear goal, like this is what I want. If you're in alignment with that, I might accept it, and I might tell you no if it's off of the roadmap or what I want to see here. The problem is sustainability. As a volunteer group of people, you have to stick around to maintain this stuff forever. So it's not a marathon, it's a relay race. Who do you pass the baton to? Like think about Vim and NeoVim, right? Did he pass the baton or was the baton taken? What happens when the community naturally splits and moves on? And so I think you gotta think about long term. What's your success criteria? And will you be there to maintain that project? Meaning you may have to write code, review pull requests forever. That's the part I don't think a lot of people realize because a lot of people, there's not a lot of maintainers that have died. We're getting to a point now where people are starting to age out. These projects are being archived. They disappear when the community disappears. So I think to your point, yes, you don't have to chase the commercial endeavor. But it may come. That commercial endeavor may come to you, actually. Like Linux probably didn't see itself powering the cloud. That commercial endeavor came to Linux. And I think the things that they did well was have modules that had that release valve where you can go build any file system you want without changing the entire kernel. So I would think of it this way. If you want there to be peace in the project, give people extension points where necessary so that everything doesn't have to flow into core in order to feel like it's a first-class citizen. That would be my number one thing as a maintainer. Give yourself an easy way to say no, and for people to give themselves their own yes, as long as they're willing to do the work. Awesome, thank you all for having me.
All right. So one real quick thing. We coincidentally found out that Kelsey and I kind of like this game called Magic the Gathering. In 2014, they coincidentally released a set that's called Journey into Nix. So for the last 48 hours, I've been trying to buy every box of that possible around. There was like 8 online. I bought 3. Meet me somewhere outside. I'll tell you how to get one of these packs, but I'm going to be handing them out for cool stuff, like various things. You'll get your own journey into Nix. It's like right behind me over here. Other than that, we want to thank Kelsey.
Yeah, go ahead and thank Kelsey.
Thank you, sir.